What is the truth? How do we find the truth? How do we know which truth is the truth? Does it take faith? When I made the documentary, The Nature of Existence, these are some of the questions I asked. Except there isn't really time in a 90-minute documentary to probe as deeply as I'd like in these questions, and so this DVD is an opportunity to do just that.
How do we know truth? Well, how do you know any sort of truth, whether it be a religious truth, a philosophical truth? You want to put it to the test of reason, for one thing. Is what you're teaching reasonable? Does it line up with self-evident truths?
Truth, everything is truth that came from messengers, that came from Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
I would say truth is just the way things really are.
When you say what is truth, I think of the Lord.
For me, when I think of the word truth, the only word that comes to mind is love.
Istina, na primer, istina kad vidiš da ti čovjek sve obaveze ti ispuni. A kad one koji ti obećaju prazne svojine, obećaju ti kule I gradove, beži od njih.
The Bible says, buy the truth and sell it not. So it's a very valuable, precious thing.
Truth is what it is.
I think the scriptures are truth.
सत्य ही भगवान है,
सत्य ईश्वर है。
我们的真理在道教里面讲什么是真理，只能说是道嘛。我们最高信仰就是道，道就是真理，道是永恒的。我们的真理就信了道。
確かに存在はする。それを見つけるために、それを手に入れるために修行するための目的であります。
Religion is really to follow the truth. So that truth has got many angles, you see. You may be right, I may be right. So we should not fight on this issue.
God forbid you should ever find truth on a product label, but it does occur from time to time.
Truth is when someone throws herself on a hand grenade to protect those around them.
What is truth? How do we know truth?
How do we find out the truth? What? The truth is in your heart.
Truth is the absence of lies.
Truth would be the nature of things. Jesus is truth manifested in the flesh.
Truth is that which is coherent with observation.
Coming to an understanding of things using facts that are verifiable and are rationally integrated.
Krishnamurti said that truth was reality without the interference of personality.
One could take a Darwinian viewpoint of truth and say truth is what survives in the long run. But I like to think that there are absolute truths as well, that 2 + 2 is 4, and it won't be 3 no matter how much you want it to be.
You are being here is the truth.
That which does not change is truth.
Truth is that which gives you a sense of well-being without much guilt.
It's a subjective thing. And what might be true for me doesn't necessarily have to be someone else's truth.
Truth is what's written in the Torah, the written Torah, and the oral Torah. That's absolute truth with a capital T. There are relative truths. You and I are sitting in this room. Okay, well, relative to the fact that we exist down here on this world created by God, it's true to say we're in this world. Is that an absolute truth? Well, no, it's relative to the fact that you and I exist.
Allah says in the Quran in Surah Isra chapter 17 verse 81, Allah says, وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. So in Islam, the truth prevails, not majority. But in today's democracy, majority wins. So this is the difference. In Islam, we have to follow the law of the Creator.
People talk about certain religions being the truth, and to them, I guess it is a fact, and it can't be an empirical fact, but it can be a fact to them. To me, truth, as I understand the definition, it is something that you cannot argue. So when you discuss a faith, that's something you can argue. What is the true faith?
One of the problems here is that we often approach experience kind of like this. If it's happened to me, it's true. Your experiences may not be your neighbor's experiences.
Take a simple example. Colorblind people and people who aren't colorblind.
I have a friend who cannot see the color green.
For him, there is no such thing as green. We talk about it, but that's not truth to him.
So when somebody says, I know it's true because I feel it strongly, are they wrong?
Absolute certainty, I don't think, is available to human beings.
Truth is a philosophical absolute, and philosophers have talked about the absolute truth or the universal truth. I'm not sure that it's even a useful concept, personally. I think we should be truthful, but I don't think we should imagine that we can understand the truth.
Everybody tells you to bury the truth, bury your real feelings. Even though as you get to be an adult, people go, I want to live the truth. Well, we couldn't live the truth. Because if everybody told everybody what they were thinking every second of the day, it would be a f***ing madhouse of a world.
It was an honor for a man to sit down with another man, or a woman to sit with another woman and just tell the truth. So we always looked down on the government because they brought the treaties and the negotiators. And they never did, and have never told the truth.
We always tell the truth. We always bring them to the truth.
The bigger truths, love, God, morality, and so forth, these things I don't think have objective meaning.
Ultimate truth is just really the knowingness at the core of your being, who you are, and what you're here to do.
More and more, as people are convinced that they have the truth, and that their truth is more valid than your truth, they're willing to kill you for it. And that makes no sense to me.
Truth is what I believe, not what he believes.
I hate to say this, but I think it's sometimes true that the church is not always a place where people can be honest. And I would want us to be in a society and in a church where we can have open, honest, genuine inquiry, and where we can say the things that we sometimes are afraid to say, and where nobody is going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to pray for our reconversion or boot us out of church because we've not quite sort of signed up to the correct doctrinal statement.
例えばキリスト教であれば唯一神がいます。それがない。ということは善悪というものをはっきり言えない。また仏教の特徴として
The concept of ultimate truth is something that has no meaning in science. On the other hand, when people talk about religious questions, that's often what they're after, is ultimate truth. But what ultimate means is last. It's simply the farthest that people have gotten so far. It's unlikely that humans will ever attain ultimate truth, perhaps only in logic and mathematics, where one states one's assumptions and then just derives things that follow from those assumptions. Can one have that kind of truth?
There may very well be knowledge that is simply not possible. That's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle or whatever, that the act of knowing changes it so that if an observer is present, it isn't the way it was, and therefore, can God know that which exists in the absence of God? We're in one of those deep paradoxical questions, and my answer, personally, this is not Mormon doctrine, this is my answer, is of course not. That God only knows what exists in the presence of God.
Throughout the 6 days of creation, God created light and darkness. How do you create darkness?
There cannot be any absolute truth. Absolute truth is absolute ignorance.
And of course, when they say there are no absolutes, my typical response is, well, are you absolutely sure of that?
To me, truth is an absolute, an eternal, an unchangeable fact or statement. So science is not about truth. It's about making us less false in our beliefs.
And it's really quite a sad thing that people demand some kind of ultimate truth and feel that nothing else is really true enough. Because that just means that I want to reach a point where I don't have to think anymore, I don't have to learn anything anymore.
One of the great strengths of science is that it recognizes that it is incapable of ever arriving at any absolute truth. That's why I love science, because it's the only permanent revolution in that sense. Religion promises ultimate truth, absolute truth, and people have a craving for that. It's really hard to tolerate ambiguity.
Truth, I believe that it exists, that there is real existence, but that it is forever approachable
but not reachable.
Is science about finding truth, or is science about determining what reality is?
Science is about looking for logical connections for cause and effect. It's about taking the big question and breaking it down to smaller pieces.
I don't think we find truth. I think truth is what is left when we pare away lies and everything that we don't want.
I do think that a discovered truth hits home much more for us as individuals than one that's just simply given to us. Because in a sense, we've earned it, we understand how we got to that point, we understand all the fallacies that were in the way en route to attaining that truth, and it's something that really we can take true authorship over.
The truth is impossible to explain, because also when Pilate asked Jesus Christ, what is the truth? He did not receive the answer.
The universe that we're growing into, it hasn't taken its final shape in any way. So there couldn't possibly be ultimate truth at this stage.
A lot of times I find that it's difficult for people to know what is true and what is not true, because they're so inundated with media, with poor nutrition, with sugar, with alcohol, with all these distractions from reality.
It's much easier to answer what's false.
What objectively exists, independent of your will, is what we mean by truth.
I don't know. I like to tell a lot of made-up stories. You might not want to ask me about the truth.
You ever met someone who really says, I want to know truth, but the truth is when you get with them, their true character comes out, and they're not wanting to know truth, they're just wanting to solidify their position?
Nearly every moral standpoint and ethical position would allow people to lie. When I ask you something as simple as, do you like my new haircut? And you hate it. Most people would suggest, whether you're a deontologist or a character ethicist or a religious person, you would say, yes, it's a great haircut.
You know, I got a good hairstylist and nobody will ever take my recommendation, you know? It's kind of, hey, anybody know where I can get my haircut? Yeah, I've got a great guy. Oh, really? Oh, that's okay.
We believe in the Baha'i faith that truth is relative. Religious truth is relative and not absolute. This is the bedrock of Baha'i belief. Say you're married, your wife's gained a little bit of weight. There's empirical evidence that can demonstrate that she's gained a little bit of weight. There's no question about that. She's feeling a little upset about that, and she's just bought some new jeans. She's trying on these new jeans. And she asks you, honey, does my butt look big in these jeans? You could say the obvious, what people would say the correspondence theory of truth would be obviously yes, there's empirical evidence to support that. But that would do no good. It wouldn't help her in any way. That's not what she's looking for. She already knows she's gained weight. She's looking for some comfort. I would say it would be true to say, no, you look beautiful or something like this to comfort your wife. That's what she needs. But if she were to ask the same question of her doctor, have I gained weight? Do I need to go on a diet? It's his professional obligation to tell her that, yes, you have gained weight. I don't think the husband's lying by saying what he's saying. I don't think the doctor's lying by saying what he's saying. I think they're both speaking the truth. It's a matter of truth takes into consideration the well-being of mankind, its peace and security.
Why should I speak truth? Because if I don't speak truth, and if everybody starts believing that the other person is not speaking truth, we will not be able to interact with each other. We will not be able to work as a team. And we cannot survive without working as a team. Human beings cannot survive.
The Quran says truth and falsehood, if they come together, falsehood will perish.
We have probabilities that something is overwhelmingly likely to be true.
Truth consists of those statements that fit all available evidence and for which there is no counter evidence and for which there is no simpler explanation. If you define truth that way, it's clear that some of the things you think are true will on subsequent investigation turn out to be false.
God, for me, is the source of all meaningful truth, and that we spend a lifetime searching after what it is to be true to ourselves and to God.
If you want God on your terms, that can't be the truth. If you want religion, have religion. Have it, who says? There are many religions, take your pick. But Baba says if you change one religion for another, it's ludicrous. You're changing your cage, changing one cage for another.
Baba said that all of this experience of the world that we experience is really a dream, an illusion.
and that it's His job to wake us up to the reality of God, which is beyond all duality.
Truth means knowledge. Truth means everything real.
Jesus said He was the truth. But that still doesn't answer the question, because what does that mean?
No charismatic leader has ever said, I am the truth. I mean, only Christ had the courage to say that.
Per noi la verità è seguire una parola che ci salva e ci rende liberi, perché ci toglie dalla possibilità di essere determinati e schiavi di un ideale e di una filosofia, di una cultura.
When we live based upon our Christian belief and have a Christ-like attitude, and have a Christ-like life, that's truth.
Truth, I think, means to me being honest about who you are, being honest about how you feel, being honest about who you love.
I have faith that the things I believe in are absolutely facts because I'm betting my life on a guy who died 2,000 years ago.
The truest faith in the world will be proven and disproven when the world is over.
So is there an objective truth that's out there, and our ability to perceive it is what is the difficulty?
Yes. I think that we are animals that evolved to solve certain problems on the African plains.
Truth is not an understanding. Truth is something to be experienced.
Truth is ultimately what is already always the case.
So what's the best way for us to determine truth if there's so many messages bombarding us from so many places?
I think the scientific method is the best way to get closest to truth.
A person can't go by what he thinks. He got to go by what the Bible said, and when he go by what the Bible said, he know he's right.
You know, all knowledge is based upon the fact there must be truth.
认为学是我们这个人提高我们的精神生活，而且达到真理的一个重要的可以说最重要的方式。
We have lost the ability to know the truth because we have let other people think for us.
Mainly, we start off believing what our parents tell us to believe, and we can't afford to test every single little thing in the environment to see if it's true or not. We go by what other people have told us, and we have to do that. That's the basis of survival.
If you really want to seek truth, you have to be willing to face that everything you've ever thought wasn't the right thing.
The Bible says we see through a mirror dimly now. We don't see the truth quite as plain as we will one day.
Since truth is a subjective thing for the most part, because our subjective axioms color all of our perceptions, we will have to come, each of us, to our own way of looking at what will be true for us.
I believe that delusion is something that's present in contemporary society, and whether it is a televangelist leader, whether it's the message that's coming through the value industry of video games or popular shows like American Idol, I think delusion is something that's a part of our system, and ultimately I think that delusion could be our undoing.
Not everything our parents tell us are lies, just some of these things. Sometimes our governments lie to us, but other times they tell us the truth. Well, so it's up to us really to decide. In all cases, it's best to think for yourself where possible. It's very difficult to get outside of your own cultural skin. You can't do it. I mean, the fish can't even know that it's in the water. It can't define the water. How would you, and that's what beliefs are to us. Beliefs are to us like water is to fish. You can't get around them. It's almost impossible to step out of your cultural milieu and look at it objectively.
You know, there's more than one way of knowing. I mean, we just experience it on a regular basis, that this kind of cause-effect knowing, that would be the way of science, an observable, empirical. And then there's the way of knowing that's more by intuition, where somehow you just see a connection, or you just see how things are. I mean, a moment of wisdom. And religion would be more that mystical side, and yet both are valid ways of knowing, and one is not the other exactly. Both need each other too.
I think you always determine what's right by going within. I think there's a very, very powerful place that you find within the silence. And sometimes that's the place that I feel that I can connect with what we call spirit, or what we call source, or what we call God.
I think enlightenment is that moment when you realize what's really going on, when you realize that you are a part of everything that is, and so is everybody else.
A lot of times we're in denial. You know, it sounds good, so we said, okay, that must be the truth. Or we're going to make a lot of money, that must be the truth.
We've been given the gift of intellectual capacity to enable us to seek what is true, what is right, what is just, what is good.
What if I feel this as true?
Well, you can, okay, so you can feel that a lot of things are true, right? Feelings aren't a very good measure of the way things are.
I'm trying to learn to say I feel instead of I think, because the most valuable lesson I've begun to learn is not to believe everything I think.
The basic principles of the scientific method can be expanded and extended to all aspects of our life. We don't have to act like scientists in everything we do, but the basic principles of reasoning and rooting out error and testing and correcting and so forth, all of that I think can apply to getting at the truth in every aspect of our lives.
Do you know something because someone who knows more than you told you this is the way it is? We can know things through intuition that we may not know any other way. Now I'm going to include with intuition the ideas of common sense and mysticism. If you've ever had a mystical experience, some sort of experience where you felt a sort of connection with the divine, you've been, maybe you're in church, maybe you're in the woods, maybe you're with a person or a group of people, or maybe you're all by yourself. If you've ever had that sort of mystical experience, you might have come away from it saying, wow, I really know something. One of the problems with mystical experience is that it's ineffable. Ineffable means that if I have a mystical experience and I tell you about it, I tell you this is the most powerful thing that has ever happened to me and I really learned such and such, my description of that is going to be very inadequate. You're going to come away from it saying, okay, I guess it was pretty powerful for him, but you know, it didn't really have the same impact on me.
We have very deep theories now about the nature of reality, whether it's quantum physics or relativity, which are intuition-defying and completely go against most of our most cherished beliefs based on our everyday experience with the world.
Rite Jnana Mukti, it means if you have knowledge, is of no use because the knowledge speaks and wisdom listens.
How do we know, or how do we find truth?
You may know what is true through meditation. It is through spirituality that you can know what is right or what is wrong.
So whatever grey matter our Creator has given us, we use that to differentiate truth from falsehood.
So people should start using their brain.
Of course.
Truth may be painful, but in the long run, it's maybe the best for your survival to know the truth.
I think as a parent is what I need to teach my child is how to accept truth over what she wishes it were. That's about being an adult.
सत्य के लिए आत्मा ऑटोमेटिक मानता है।
所以孔子讲，三人行必有我师焉，你一定要通过向别人、向别的族群、别的国家、别的文化学习。
If you're really a truth seeker, you have nothing to fear from the scientific method. The scientific method is curious, is questioning. If there's a God, if there's a creator who put in place this world, understanding that world will only get you closer to him, her, it.
When there are so many conflicting messages bombarding us, how does a person decide which message or religion is correct?
You shall know the tree by the fruit it bears.
The problem with determining truth by whether it fits with what you know is, if what you know is wrong, then everything that comes in you'll judge as true when it's false and false when it's true.
No one has the truth because no one stands separate enough to own it. The truth is all beings at once. There's nothing outside of truth.
A person that has a diametrically opposed view of someone else and both claim it's the truth, it is the truth to them.
You have to be extremely careful which people you take their word for it. I think your best bet is to look at their past history. Look at how good people have been in the past at making true statements about the universe.
Sometimes people who beat their breast, as it were, about knowing the truth are sometimes the most frail inside and have the greatest lack of sense of truth inside.
I actually tell my children that there are other faiths out there existing. Why? Because when they come into proximity to those faiths, when they get to college or another place, I don't want them to be knocked off their block going, wow, there is something other than Christianity. I believe my God can be questioned, but I also believe He's always right.
What is reality?
What is reality?
We live within a subjective reality. We can from there connect to an objective reality, which is scientific, mathematical, demonstrable, provable, predictive, something that says these are the probabilities, it's likely that this will happen.
You know, we all have a blind spot. Right about here, there's a blind spot in my visual field. I'm not actually seeing my own hand right now, but I have a sense I can see it. Why? Well, my brain's making up a hand. My brain knows my hand ought to be there, and so it creates a picture of my hand and feeds it to me. So I'm seeing my hand, but it's not really there. That's reality. It's my brain making its best guess about what's out there in the world and giving me a picture of it.
If you look at religious people, the religious arguments, I think you would find they haven't had a good history of predicting what will happen, of really understanding the world.
Christian life is partly about the development of a habit of seeking wise judgments about who you are and about the way the world is. And if you're able, through prayer and through a whole range of ways, to devise that kind of what I would call wisdom, the gift of discerning the spirits, as it were, then you will educate yourself.
The ability of all of us to see something in the same way, that wouldn't be very much fun. We'd have to stop reading poetry and novels and, reading and listening to other people's stories if we all knew the same things and thought the same things about it.
Stop worrying about which one you have to choose. Live your life with sincerity. If your quest is sincere, the right thing only comes your way. There is no criteria other than you listening to your heart.
When people say that they hear voices, God spoke to me, God put it in my heart to do something, where do those voices come from?
Well, those voices come from inside the head. The brain is an extremely powerful simulator. The imagination is very powerful. We know this when we sleep because we have dreams which, for all we know, are real. I mean, they seem like reality, although we are transported in our sleep to strange and wonderful places that never existed. So the brain is clearly capable of doing that, and it can do it when we're awake as well as when we're asleep. So it's extremely unimpressive when people say, God spoke to me. That really is one of the least impressive arguments for belief in any kind of supernatural being.
I personally have a problem as soon as somebody says, God told me to do this. It's sort of, there could be something wrong with you. You probably better get yourself checked out.
I would say schizophrenia is the one-word answer to that.
Most people who believe in God don't hear voices and God doesn't talk to them. That's rare. But it does happen, and we have a pretty good sense that probably these are temporal lobe seizures or just sort of anomalies that happen where people hear things, the voices are inside.
People who hear voices that they don't think come from their own minds are hearing something that's part of their own minds that they're either suppressing or repressing or fantasizing about.
When schizophrenics hear voices, there's actual activation in the auditory cortex. They're actually hearing. They're hearing as if they're hearing another sound. So they're not just telling you that they're hearing a voice, it's actually something they are hearing. Now, the important point, of course, is nobody else can hear it.
One line of research shows that the temporal lobe is very much engaged in religious experiences, that when you look at it as a sort of picture, it's as though that part of the brain lights up.
These are partly delusional, but maybe in certain cases it is an internal voice, internal awareness which transforms person from one level of consciousness to another level of consciousness.
Unless we are in that position where it is us that are hearing those voices, we are not in a position to judge.
Are there times when people are communicated with by beings that are not physically present in the flesh? I believe so. And I've known people who have been communicated with in dreams. I've had dreams that were, I felt, and believe still, to be gifts of knowledge that I could not have experienced another way.
I spent probably 45 hours out in the shop machining parts and changing things totally around. Now, God didn't say, put this blower on, put that nozzle in, but he says, go back, you're too much. I just get that word. You're putting too much air in the motor. So we changed things, and we came out this weekend with a totally new combination, and it's going to run very, very well.
It's this sensation that we experience that bolsters our sense that there must be some other realm out there, that there must be some higher power, for where else would these feelings come from? Recent research is showing that if you take people and put them in an fMRI and measure their brain while they're having these experiences, that it can all be explained by neurophysiology.
Almost every experience that human beings can have has been mapped to specific parts of the brain.
When we imagine things or hallucinate things, or when we actually hear or see things, we tend to activate a lot of the same basic brain areas. So the visual system of the brain is activated when we actually see something, as well as when we imagine seeing something.
There's this babble of experience and voices behind your eyes at all time. I mean, that's just who you are. Most of the time we have a way of being able to dampen it. But in moments of terror, in moments of stress and strain, things begin to break through.
I would sit in church where I often felt like I could get away from the world and sit in a quiet, empty church, and I would have profound realizations about my life. I thought that was external. I didn't think of it as me being quiet enough to let, my deeper self be heard.
The brain is a whole family of independent information processing modules, all of which are processing their information and doing what they were built to do, sometimes with crosstalk. And the one that you think you are is just one of many. One of the first things you learn when you study psychology is you're not in control in the way you thought you were. We all have the sense, our experience is that there's one me in here. I sit here behind my eyes and I look out through them as if they're the windshield of a car, and I see the world as it really is. In fact, it turns out there's lots of people back here, and different ones of them are controlling your behavior at different times. The one that has language, the one that is conscious, the one you think you are is just a member of the family.
If you define anybody who hears a voice as being psychotic, then okay, now every religious person is going to be defined as psychotic. Now that's a definition. We see this happening all the time. You look at diseases like attention deficit disorder. Why does it seem like like 90% of the kids have attention deficit disorder these days? Well, it's part of how we define things now. And if you have a very clear definition, if you have a very limited focal definition about things, you can get a better handle on it.
I suppose you could have a worldview in which every time a human being, went to the bar and had a drink or got bonked in the head, that a demon shows up to create that set of symptoms. I suppose you could believe that, but this is, in science you would say the demon theory is not necessary to explain what we see.
People come to us often and say, I want to be possessed, or I am possessed, and what do I do? And we always tell them that's a psychological problem, usually arising in people who are desperate for attention. And you should seek some kind of mental health care from somebody who is not a spiritual believer, because that's the only way you're really going to get past this.
The early time when religions originated, there wasn't any understanding of how these experiences were produced. There was no knowledge of the brain. They had to be accepted prima facie on their evidence. If one heard dead ancestors speaking to them in dreams, then this was evidence that they continued to exist.
Say 500 years ago, people would interpret these sleep paralysis dreams as incubi, succubi coming into the rooms. These are demons, Satan's helpers, harassing them in their beds at night. 150 years ago, people had the exact same experiences, but they described them as poltergeists and ghosts coming into the room at night while they were asleep. Today, we hear about aliens oozing through the walls from the mothership, harassing people in their beds at night. It's all the same experience, but your culture tells you what to call those experiences.
It could be coming from another aspect of my own consciousness. It could be coming from my guide. It could be coming from another being altogether. It could just be coming from God. In some sense, an aspect of my own imagination may be making it all up. But I think that idea in and of itself is sometimes just as astounding, that humans could get into a state where they can tap into whatever they need to tap into to get information that will help them make profound changes in their lives, even if it's not coming from another entity. That's pretty amazing.
When people are actually receiving revelation from God, there's a coherence and a rationality about it. It passes tests. And the things they say end up being demonstrably true when you live according to them. And if it doesn't pass those tests, then it clearly was not from God. And so I believe that there are people who have received revelation from God and still do, but I'm also not required to believe any particular instance of that. Just because somebody claims to have heard it, I can be perfectly skeptical, and trust me, I am. Extremely skeptical about anybody's claim that God told them this and God told them that, because most of the time, people with claims like that, it is irrational, it's inconsonant with what I know from experience of the universe, and I don't believe it. The revelations that I do believe are the ones that are borne out by my experience and by my thinking. They are logical, they're coherent, it all holds together.
And people say, how do you know that was God who told you that? I said, because it was wise, and I'm just not that wise.
The way our brain evolved to have different hemispheres, we can easily think that voices that are in our minds aren't coming from ourselves.
Well, I've come across many patients who've had a schizophrenic form of illness, who've had delusions. I mean, some of them, we had at one stage 2 people who thought they were the Messiah, both on the same ward. And it ended up in a great big punch-up because one said, I'm the Messiah, the other said, no, I'm the Messiah. And they had to be separated by the nurses and basically restrained. But a person like that actually believes what they're saying. He came to me once and he said he's come to save the world. And I said, who told you that? And he said, oh, God told me. I heard the voice of God telling me to do that. Now, clearly to me, this was a sort of a religious delusion, but for him it was real. So I had to sort of take seriously what he's saying without actually believing what he was saying.
Some schizophrenics become really pretty much non-functional, and then you can give them some medication, and then they return to a quote-unquote more normal way of looking at the world, and they tend to recognize those different perceptions as being negative and being flawed themselves. When you talk to a religious individual, they don't look at those experiences as being flawed, as being wrong. In fact, if anything, they think of them as being very positive and very important.
There are many writers also who claim that what Robert Louis Stevenson, that what they wrote had been revealed to them during their dreams. Now, Muhammad certainly was one of the most unusual in terms of these kinds of dreams. He, like Jesus, was illiterate, and he would then represent or reproduce and describe the dreams to the anamnesis who would write it down.
How do you know whether it's God or the devil who's speaking to you? And I think once you put that question, you need a psychiatrist in the room.
Jesus, Muhammad, they heard voices. People today hear voices. How do we determine who's the true Messiah?
Well, that's a question I've asked myself many times. I mean, how do you know that the one of all the people who are in the inpatient facilities who say they're Jesus Christ, how do you know one of them isn't? And how would you know? It's a difficult thing to answer because it does depend a lot on how they are ultimately able to integrate successfully or not into society. And if they can gain 3 million followers, then we're more likely to say that they're not psychotic and they're not schizophrenic, and therefore it's kind of a definition by end result.
One doesn't want to use the word mental illness for something that afflicts the great majority of humankind. But apart from that, if somebody had, if an individual has faith that he is Napoleon, then you say he's loony. But if 100 million people have faith in some God, then because it's 100 million, you're supposed to respect it. But there's actually no more evidence for the God that they believe in than for the lunatic's belief that he's Napoleon.
If everybody's crazy, then crazy is normal. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Well, I tried to get away from that in a way. Let me put it this way. It's not enough to say that hundreds of millions of people believe something if the evidence for it is just as shaky as the belief that one inmate of a lunatic asylum believes it. We should look at the evidence in both cases.
我感觉还是得按孔子那个，就是从学习、从实践得的真知。神不会告诉我们，你好比你做了个梦啊，受到某种启发，那是你白天日有所思、夜有所想得到的。
When people tell me they hear spiritual voices in their head, most of the times they're absolutely deluded.
And you just have to look at their actions. If you look at their actions, people have ideas in their head that they need to do something and strap a bomb on themselves to support their religious idea or to subjugate a certain type of people. These type of voices in their head are total aberration. Another discernment point is this, are the voices in your head there to serve all beings, everywhere, regardless of who they are, what religion they are, what background they are? And are those voices in your head telling you to open your heart to all beings? If they're of that direction, go ahead and try it out. But ultimately, if they're not, it's a part of the delusion in the mind. Let it all go. Discover that God is nothing that plants something in your head. God is the very ground that you walk on. The wisdom, the knowledge, the insights, everything that you need is right here in this very moment. That's what needs to be breathed in, experienced, and offered for everyone's sake.
It's one thing to speak to God, but it's another thing if God speaks to you. And in the old days, if God spoke to you, you might have made it into the Bible. Now, if God speaks to you, you're either probably homeless or on television asking for donations.
Do you think people are born with an internal need to believe in something, or is it something that we learn socially?
We were all born with the nature of God. We were all born with the nature to submit. Everything was born to submit its will to do the will of God.
Religion is a biological imperative. They're starting to see that people have this genetic tendency to be religious or not religious.
That sperm had enough intelligence. It knew what to do. You didn't have to tell it what to do. When that sperm reached that egg, the first thing that was created was the brain.
It's part of genetic coding. It comes automatically from the internal rhythms.
I'd have to question what kind of God would install a transmitter in our heads that compels us to believe he exists only in the form of, in a million different forms, thus leading us to kill one another to prove that our version of him is right.
Our need to believe is internal, and there's actually a void in our hearts and in our souls. There's a void that can only be filled by the presence of the Holy Spirit.
And we'll try to fill it with alcohol or drugs or crime or adventure or whatever. For me, it was probably adventure. I pursued adventure.
I believe we're born with a need to believe. I mean, we're created by God, for God.
Muslim means a person who submits his will to Almighty God. So every human being, when he's born as a Muslim. Later on, he's influenced by his parents, by his teachers, by his elders. He may start doing fire worship, he may start doing idol worship, and he may go to the wrong path. Therefore, the right word for a person who is a non-Muslim and accepts Islam, the right word is revert, it's not convert.
What if you were raised up out in the woods and you never knew about any kind of religion or God? You might think a tree's a god or something. That's the same thing.
I think there's an internal inclination to believe it. I think if you somehow took a bunch of newborn infants and put them on a desert island and somehow let them build their own civilization, I think they would come up with one more religion that, like all the ones we've had so far, are very largely pointed in the same direction.
我想人呢是需要一种信仰，那么这个信仰的形式可以是不一样的，不一定有一个最高的神，但是呢，这个被信仰的对象呢，一定是给你的人生能够有一种指引。
We have a need to make sense out of our experience, to see coherence in our lives, to have a sense that what we do is worth doing, is meaningful.
I don't think there's an innate need in us for religion, but there is an innate need in us for knowledge. We are the organism that wants to know. The problem is, most of the good questions can't be answered.
Do humans have an internal need to believe in something?
Yes.
Or was religion externally imposed upon us?
No. I think we're at least genetically conditioned, if we have human consciousness, to ask why.
The fact that there's so many religions, that religion has been with us for so long, seems to suggest that there's a biological origin for this, that whatever feelings we have internally, this need for a story or to follow charismatic leaders or to believe that there's something after death, all of these things, it almost seems like it's became evolutionarily advantageous to believe that.
We've been selected for obedience to authority. From the outside, that looks like a belief.
There might be some biological elements, but it's not something that I think all human beings suffer from.
How does one go about believing? Is it something that you decide, or is it something that happens to you? Does God choose you, or do you choose God?
It's a little bit of both. The Bible teaches that no man can come to God except the Father draw him.
Being raised with religious belief is not the only reason we have religious belief, but it's the primary reason. In the United States, most people are religious. That is, most people claim they believe in God. I think the figures usually, it oscillates around 90%. My guess is, if you did a little experiment and you raised all of these children without religion, what percentage do you think would believe in God? It'd be something like 5%. So that means the vast majority of people believe in God because their parents told them to. When we're children, we're very vulnerable. We're little sponges, and our whole lives depend on these people who are taking care of us and loving us. And when they tell us something's true, we believe it. That's pretty good, because most of what they tell us is true. We really shouldn't go play in traffic. It really doesn't make sense to eat nails.
What's the definition of crazy?
I mean, I'll clearly tell you, I'm completely out of my mind.
If we share the same irrationality, it's somehow forgivable more than if we don't.
What is in human beings is their need to belong. We are social animals. We don't live alone. You know what I mean? We don't like to live alone. You know, we like to be in groups. And so the whole religious thing is a combination of several things, you know, the desire to be part of something, the desire on some other people to be in charge of something, and the question of ignorance.
I don't have any inherent need to believe in a deity. I was born not believing in one.
I would argue that there is a need, there is some kind of compulsion or some kind of inner motivated drive to make sense of the world that we live in.
It would appear that even our earliest civilizations, when they were writing on cave walls, had religions. So I suspect it's an inborn thing.
Our brains evolved to detect and anticipate intentions in conscious agents. So we evolved in a community of people. We might have enemy tribes, friendly tribes. We had to be able to interpret what's going on in their mind, what their intentions are. And our brains evolved the ability to do that. The result is that we over-detect, so that we see conscious intention behind even ordinary inanimate objects, trees and wind and machines or whatever. And that this idea sort of evolved into religion. This is where we got the idea of spirits and souls and God. But the idea that spirits inhabit all objects eventually evolved into the idea that everything is directed by God, either directly or indirectly, so that we detect conscious intention in ordinary random events.
If people don't have science and they don't have a good description of the world, you can see the Greeks saying, okay, well, there's something looking after thunderstorms, there's something looking after the crops, there's something looking after this, that, and the other. But now we have a fairly complete causality. And when we do, I can't understand why people want to put God into the mix.
Religion has been imposed because it's a way to maintain order in a culture. It maintains order in the system.
The way the brain is structured is in such a way that makes religious and spiritual ideas very easy for us to have, very easy for us to engage in. It's very easy for human beings to think about the concept of God, and that does seem to be built in to a certain extent into the basic functions of what the brain does for us and how the brain works. Now, how it got there, again, is the big $100,000 question, and whether it was millions of years of evolution that asked us questions about life and death, and then we ultimately posited a concept of God, or whether, as many religions believe, that God did actually give human beings this ability and this capability. That certainly is something that would also explain why that particular way of thinking is there. I mean, certainly it makes sense that if God is here in the universe, that there would be some kind of fundamental way in which human beings could have an interaction with God, and it would make sense that our brain would have the ability to think in terms of spiritual and religious ideas.
There are very, very strange experiences that people have. Out-of-the-body experiences, transcendent experiences, hearing the voices of dead ancestors. Well, in the past, these experiences were interpreted as evidence of another dimension of reality, some kind of spiritual dimension. The difficulty is that these kinds of experiences, including mystical experience, can be explained in terms of brain processes now.
A taxi driver in San Francisco, he has frontal lobe epilepsy, and he has very successful medication for it. But if he stops taking the medication, quite suddenly, after 2 days, he gets the revelation. He's Paul on the road to Damascus. It all happens. He knows that there is a great power looking after all of us. And he takes the medication, and it all goes away, and he's rational again.
Human beings are born with an inherent predisposition to believe in a dualistic perception of reality. That unlike any other species, humans have this sense that there's the physical realm, the empirical realm, those things we can see and touch and smell and feel. And then, underlying that, every culture has had this sensibility that there's this transcendental reality that supersedes the physical. And even though we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't taste it or smell it, none of us have witnessed it, we have this tremendous faith that it's real, which to me, again, is more evidence that it's a compulsion being generated from the brain.
I do think it's like a drug. I think it's a drug that anesthetizes people to living in reality.
It is an inherent aspect in us because we are body and spirit, and therefore the spiritual dimension within us, which is an integral part of our being, of necessity craves for a deeper meaning to life than just the purely physical or psychological or temporal.
This is why we pick and choose religions. This is why we pick and choose our favorite football team. We want to be a part of and belong to something.
信じるように生まれてきているというよりは、信じなければ生きにくいんではないでしょうか。
And the answer to what's the purpose of life is, we don't know. But we're just not satisfied with that kind of answer. And so, in the absence of being able to actually develop a credible answer, we simply make one up, as if a bad answer is better than no answer. But you know, in science, we think the opposite. We think a good answer is best, no answer is second best, and a bad answer is the worst.
When you look at the correspondence that Darwin and his friends had, they talked about all of these issues. Nothing was hidden. You know, they were quite open in their atheism or their agnosticism, but they did it in such a gentlemanly fashion. They didn't call people who didn't believe as they believe idiots, and they didn't say that they believed nonsense. You know, and I think there's a danger, therefore, we're born with belief, but we're also born with a passionate conviction in our own righteousness, and out of which fanaticism develops.
A lot of times people say, and they imply that there's something wrong with you if you don't have faith, but you have to have faith. What is faith?
Faith is the essence of things hoped for, but the realities of things not yet seen.
Belief in the indistinct.
It's a hope and a wish.
Faith is belief.
You have got some belief in something, that becomes your faith.
Faith is belief without corroboration or a need to corroborate.
Faith is where you start from the answer rather than the question.
Faith is believe in something that you can't see.
I have no idea about faith.
You gotta have faith. You have to have faith. Without faith, what good are we?
Faith is something that you accept because it feels right, because your parents told you it was true, because your system of peers and friends, your nation, tell you that it is true. It doesn't have to be demonstrated in fact.
It's easy to see why faith is important to religious people because they've got nothing else. And so, since there is no evidence, the only reason for believing is faith. And they trumpet faith as some kind of a virtue. You're particularly virtuous if you believe something when there's no evidence. It's more virtuous to believe it if there's no evidence than if you require evidence. So faith is very important to them. But of course, it's easy to see that faith is not a good reason to believe anything.
I know there's a God. Well, I don't know there's a God the way I know there's a table,
because I can point to the table and say, here it is. And I can even show you that there's a table. I can't show you there's a God.
Faith is affirming something which is not absolutely evident to you.
It's a gift that we received from God to believe in what God revealed us.
In Shab-e Miraj, there is one Surah Bani Israel that Allah has mentioned in Quran, Subhanallazi asra bi'abdihi laylan min al-masjid al-haram ila al-masjid al-aqsa allazi barakna hawlahu linuriyahu ayatina.
In my opinion, faith is just a way to make personal prejudice appear respectable.
People who say, I feel it's true, are very often the same people who say, who get very outraged when cultural relativists and so forth talk about, well, we should do what feels good, and what's true is what I feel is true. They'll attack other people for using the exact same argument. Really, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, obviously we know, I mean, everybody knows that emotion and feeling are not very reliable ways of determining what's real and what's not. And all one has to do is look around, and you could say that the Taoist, for example, really feels that the Tao, I mean, he feels it. And you feel Jesus, and someone else might feel the will of Allah, someone else might feel the spirit of their ancestors. Well, they can't all be right. So right there you have massive evidence that feeling misleads people. Once you know that, then you should be immediately suspicious if you're basing your beliefs on feelings, because you know it's misled tons of other people. There's no reason why it wouldn't mislead you.
People who tell you you have to have faith, you just have to have faith. In what? In their word, in their worldview? When was this book written and by whom? What I've often found is that people who subscribe to a religious belief, and this isn't always the case, but by and large, for people who aren't maybe theologians, they often don't know the history of their own religions. You know, have you ever read the Bible, not the King James Version, but have you read it, the original text in the original Hebrew? And maybe it says something quite different than you think it does.
We kind of speak in terms, very general terms, of people of faith. Well, what is the object of their faith is what I want to know. You have to have the correct object of your faith, and the object of your faith must be Jesus Christ.
Faith is a choice to believe the truth.
What is faith?
Faith is submitting your will to truth. It's acting on what you know to be true.
But if you know it to be true, then that's not faith.
It's biblical faith. It's acting on what you know to be true.
The opposite of faith is doubt. That's all. Two directions.
Till today, I have not been able to understand what is the difference between stupidity and the so-called faith. You say, this is my faith. It means it is beyond logic, beyond reason, beyond any test. It cannot be proved, it cannot be tested, it cannot be justified by any logic. That is faith. And if it is faith, then what is stupidity?
That seems to me to be the theme of con people. You know, believe me because I said it.
I'd research something before I put my full faith and trust into it because, you know, these days you never know, it might be a scam or something.
Faith in some ways is the opposite of knowledge. Knowledge is a beautiful thing, builds bridges. I wouldn't want to build a bridge with faith. I wouldn't want to drive my car across it. However, I wouldn't want to build my life with knowledge because that's a whole different sort of thing. Faith requires you letting go and breathing. Faith requires you to really experience the moment.
What is faith?
I'm Muslim, I'm Shia Muslim, so that's my faith. And according to what I believe, according to the way I've been raised, so I do whatever I've been trained for.
Some belief is absent of knowledge. I just believe in a thing, but I can't explain it.
A belief is always irrational. A scientist will never talk about belief. It's either yes or no, it's measurable or not measurable.
We know what's going on the planet, but we don't want to believe it because it's too uncomfortable. We know what the universe is like, but we don't want to believe it because it's too complicated. There are so many things where we actually do have knowledge and we don't believe it.
I believe I'm in California now. I could also say I have faith that I'm in California now, but I have faith for reasons. I have tons of evidence. And so rather than using faith as a synonym for belief, they use faith as a reason to believe. They believe, I believe because I have faith. You need faith because without faith you wouldn't have any reason to believe something.
This idea of faith I completely reject as being one of the most nefarious principles ever adopted by mankind. Because if you can use this ridiculous reason to believe something, you can believe in anything you want. You can found any belief system or any belief idea on, all you have to do is say, oh, I have faith in it.
You can believe in things that could turn out to be true. You can believe in things that could turn out to be false.
Faith as a way of finding out what is true in the universe has a long history, and if we learn anything from that history is that it doesn't work. I mean, it seems to me just objectively true that faith gives the wrong answer most of the time. And we can say that because if we look at the whole range of human religions, all asserted with, equal certainty by their proponents based on their profound personal faith, they're mutually inconsistent. And so they can't all be right. In fact, only a tiny fraction of them can be right, so the majority of them are wrong. Therefore, faith leads you to wrong beliefs the majority of the time.
Faith, by definition, is steadfast. It's unshatterable. That's what defines it. That's the faith. You don't go around it. Reason, the scientific method, is by similar definition, something that's fluid.
All successful scientists are optimists. What that basically means is that we have faith that we can actually solve problems that often initially seem daunting or even insoluble.
Faith is totally antithetical to science, not hope. Optimism isn't. But faith, a conviction in the absence of evidence, is a dangerous thing.
It's funny that it's a word that with such positive connotations in our society. And yet, that's really the anathema of science. The idea of believing in things for which there's no evidence, indeed, which contradict all evidence. That's the thing you get kicked out of science for doing.
It's an abiding assurance and conviction in something that you cannot see.
This is what we call the confirmation bias in cognitive psychology. The confirmation bias is where you look for and find confirmatory evidence for what you already believe, and you ignore disconfirmatory evidence. You remember the hits, you forget the misses. This is how psychics work, astrologers, tarot card readers. All religious faiths have this. This is what drives most of our beliefs.
People who have faith have settled with life. They say, I now have peace. Why? Because I have faith.
I have faith that we're all going to die. That's about it.
I go to sleep at night and I believe I'm going to wake up the next morning. And I also believe if I don't wake up, that's okay too. Because I just have a deeper faith that things are as they should be, and there's not everything I have control of.
Faith is when things are not going your way and you're hating what's going on and you're praying, saying, you know what, Lord, I know you're going to pull me through this. I know there's a reason this is happening, and I'm sticking with you.
The psalmist never stops believing, because the Psalms always close with a rendition of, I'm going to continue to keep believing no matter what, is basically what it says. Because where would I go without you?
In the Jewish context, faith is that which allows me to connect to something beyond intellect. That which intellect cannot connect to, faith allows me to connect to.
In Christian terms, and among Muslims also, has come to mean something far more profound. It is the willingness to suspend disbelief.
Faith that the way that you understand something is true no matter what anyone else discovers is an abuse of faith.
The whole issue of faith is about risk. You take the risk to believe, to act as though it were true, and as you behave as though it were true, it becomes more true for you. It becomes a voyage of discovery. And I think that for me, what carries me along in a sense is I'm not someone who would say, I experience God in tangible ways very often at all, rarely. But occasionally, very occasionally, there's like a glimpse of grace, and somehow it's enough and it carries you on.
I'd rather have my kid know Jesus Christ and a true passionate faith and be stupid than to be intelligent and to not know God. I said, now, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. It shouldn't have to be. But we value education much more than we value a person's walk with God.
But the original Greek word in the Bible that's translated into faith in the Greek means fellowship.
Maybe you just got to have faith is a way of getting people to not question the authority figure that happens to be sitting high at the moment. I think that how could you possibly, as a human being, offend the creator of the universe, if there is such an entity, by looking around and trying to understand the universe?
Everybody needs a community to belong to. A community of faith, for me, is the best kind of community to belong to.
Faith is something that you offer a loved one when they don't deserve it.
I have faith in the laws of statistics. Can I prove that the laws of statistics will work the next time I use them? No. So even I, who pretend to be the most faithless person in the world, have faith in certain things.
I'm here. That's fact. I'm a man of faith. That also is a fact.
What is a fact?
Well, in science, a fact is the data of the world. It's what's out there to study. If what you mean by fact is it's absolutely true, there are no facts in science. There's just provisional realities, and they're more or less likely to be true, but there are no absolute facts.
Well, I would say faith is fact, if you get it right.
Facts are to the material world what faith is in the spiritual world.
Fact is something that starts out as an opinion, but ultimately stands up to direct observation, to experiments, lack of contradictory evidence, and most importantly, predictive capability.
A fact is something that can be proven or disproven.
But the fact that Jesus lived on earth, the fact that there's good evidence for the scriptures being written the way they were and passed down, the fact of archaeology documenting those things, that's fact.
If you have two people talking about whatever, they could be talking about the Catholic religion or Twinkies, they're both going to have some facts that are wrong and are right, and some hearsay that they're going to say is fact because people want to be right. So they're going to go, no, I know I'm right. Mine's a fact. And then you go, really? Because I have the book on Twinkies right here and you're full of shit. So your facts are wrong. Nope. And they'll fight you to death, even though you have a book that proves their facts wrong, because the guy that invented the Twinkie wrote the book. And this guy just knows about Twinkies from shit and hearsay.
You believe something to be true, the more often it happens and the more predictable it is.
The difference between a theory and what we call a fact is an experimental result. It's something that you did, and it's a result. It hit the ground, I dropped it, that's a fact. Why do all these things drop? Why does the moon stay in orbit? What drives the orbits of all the planets? The thing that ties all the facts together, the overarching idea that connects all the dots, is what we mean by scientific theory. And we only take those scientific theories seriously if all of the consequences that they predict bear out in experiments.
Why doesn't God just show us proof?
Well, maybe because he doesn't exist.
We would deny it. Not we, but people would deny it. They're going to find excuses not to believe.
But the proof is there. That's why Jesus Christ came. That's why Krishna came. That's why Buddha came. That's why Allah came. So that is itself is a proof.
I have to admit, some of my friends, tell me that they've had some sort of supernatural revelation of Jesus appearing to them. I'll have to admit I'm a little skeptical when people say that, because it hasn't happened to me.
I prayed for people's lives that were completely hooked on drugs to see them delivered like that and their lives turned around.
Miracles are an illusion. There is nothing miraculous that's ever been documented in any way, shape, or form.
Miracle by definition means you cannot logically prove how it was done. That's called a miracle. So what was miracle yesterday is a scientific fact today.
Your reality is determined by what you believe you're going to observe. And if you believe that there's going to be something there, there will be something there.
What people want to know is, did the resurrection actually happen? There's no possible way to prove that, because if somehow he came back alive and a medical doctor would say, well, he wasn't really dead, something like that. Well, if he was really dead and he came back to life, well, then he wasn't really dead. Or being dead, it means something entirely different than what we think it means. It just doesn't fit into the natural world. You can't. There's just two different things.
God is not here to prove himself to us. If anything, we are in the constant pursuit to prove ourselves to him.
Why doesn't God just come down and say, here I am, and then everyone would believe? Well, to a quote-unquote true believer,
God's already done that to them.
Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I, myself. Touch and see. For a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. After saying this, Jesus showed them the wounds.
We believe historically there's more historical proof for his existence on earth than that of George Washington.
We don't have any proof of what happened at Mount Sinai. You know, the archaeologists covered the Sinai Peninsula from north to south and can't find a mountain that they can agree on was the mountain that Moses stood on.
They always talk about evidence, but you know, it says, look, all these people in the Bible, all the people who wrote the Bible, they all agree, so it's evidence. But then the people that agreed about the Quran, that's not evidence.
If we insist on proof all the time, we're not very loving or trustful people.
The ultimate power is the power of opening the heart so that there is no separation to anyone else. That's the true miracle. That's the impossible miracle, and that's the only miracle worth any value in my book.
God, always the miracle you can see in the world, because the air is blowing and the water is flowing, rain is coming, sun is giving light, earth is giving these all cereal and productions and these things. Everything is the miracles of the God.
Creation itself is an absolutely wonderful fact, a wonderful proof of the existence of God.
If we were able to live life with the clarity that it is possible to live life with, every moment would be living proof.
Miraculous things happened around Meher Baba, yet he always claimed that he would never do any miracles, and he did no miracles.
If God showed us proof, that would be knowledge. It'd be like a chair. If God showed us proof, it'd be like having your favorite uncle, or maybe your not so favorite uncle, show up for Christmas dinner. God becomes a thing. There can be no proof. There can never be proof of God.
Since there is no God, any claims of there being proof that he exists are fictional.
I intuitively know that there must be a God. I've experienced God.
What proof do you have that God exists?
The law of design. Wherever there's design, there must be a designer.
Now, an atheist may say, but that's not really evidence. You're using circular logic and so forth. And an atheist has their way of believing about the world. And they're going to then take information and accept information. They're going to look at the Bible and say, well, of course that wasn't written by God. That must have been written by a human being. They're going to look at a beautiful sunset and say, that's the color and light refracting through the atmosphere instead of this is a miracle of God. They're not going to look at it that way. And I've always kind of mused over the thought, well, what if God really did come down to the big atheists in the world and said, here I am, I'm God, believe. Rather than believing, my guess is that most of them would check into a mental institution.
I would say that there is no evidence available that is out there, that is available for people to look at, that would confirm one religion over the other.
Why not create a world where there's more revelation, and then there's no questions? But there's also no service. You can't do anything, because there's no hiddenness. So there's nothing for us to do. The house is complete.
If we had all the answers, we would probably become as gods ourselves.
When you discourage learning, it sounds to me like someone who wants to have authority and control over you, discouraging you from figuring out that they don't know what they're talking about.
The vast majority, probably 99% of people who believe in God believe because their parents told them to believe, and their social group, and their schoolmates, and their teachers, and every book they ever read. It's inculcated into them by culture.
Usually what I do, and what you do, and what most people do, is say, don't show me that evidence. I want to keep the belief I had before.
Even if they don't find, old piece of crockery that says on it, Abraham slept here, or Moses was here, or something like that, I still believe these people lived.
What gives you a certainty about your beliefs?
It's been a long time since I was certain about anything. Maybe when I was 16, I'm not sure. It was a great time because the universe was much clearer then. And the older I got, the more things just became doubtful and questionable. I'm not certain of anything.
Well, first of all, I don't have a certainty. I have a probability. And that's how we all live our lives.
Maybe the idea isn't that you ever will have the certainty, but the idea is that you keep searching.
What I'm certain of is that my experience of God is a continual mystery.
The more religious you are, the more you ask yourself every day, am I doing the right thing or am I just making a fool of myself?
God wanted the resurrected Jesus to shift our focus away from fear and doubt.
In Quran there is a verse, ek zalikal kitab lari bafi.
People who banish doubt wind up not people of faith at all, but they wind up being fanatics. So, I think the difference between faith and fanaticism is doubt.
Doubts are always about something that is positive. Have you thought about it? When someone tells you, I love you so much, you go, really? But when someone says, I'm mad at you, you never ask them, really?
In the moment that you have certainty, you're just like those people that flew those planes into those towers. That's a dangerous path.
You know you're going to die, then why you want to make your own way? Make it the way God wants.
I have a certainty in that I belong to a religion that's a few thousand years old, and I'd like to think that we haven't all been duped all these years.
One of the things that I've always sensed in people with very strong religious convictions is that they don't really believe what they're saying, and they keep on telling you this in the hopes that you'll believe it and it will make it easier for them to believe it.
People want to often believe in God out of kind of like insurance, just in case there is a God. So when they get up there, as if we're going to fool God when we get up there and we go, I really believed in you. God would, if there is a God, then he knows if we believe or not. And we can't fool him by kind of pretending we believe and by saying we believe.
I didn't know that black people had made the contribution we made to the world until I started studying. And that's where my certainty started coming from. My self-esteem started building up because I was always told black people were nothing. You all were swinging from trees in Africa. You are akin to the ape. These are things that I heard in elementary school, junior high school. But when I heard different, when I found out that, in fact, it was Africa is the cradle of civilization, not Europe. The oldest known man was found in Ethiopia. And Leakey called that man Zinjanthropus, knowing that we didn't know Swahili. Zinj means black, Anthropus means man. And then years later, he found his mother, Lucy, who was over 3 million years old. I mean, this was fascinating to me because no one ever told me that. So when I went on a quest for who I am and where I'm really from, and when I started studying Africa, and as I walked back into history, Alex Haley in his book wrote that many Africans that was brought to America, in fact, were Muslims.
Can religion and science coexist, or are they mortal enemies?
I absolutely don't understand that there's any problem. Galileo had 2 children. He put both of them into a nunnery. And Newton spent more time writing exegeses on the Bible than he did doing scientific work. Indeed, the only significant scientific figure, the founders of our modern scientific world, the only person who was nearly an atheist was Darwin. And only nearly. He was an agnostic. So the founders of science were all of them religious people. Even, if you talk about the Big Bang Theory was designed by a man called Charles Lemaitre, who was a Catholic priest. And he had to persuade Einstein that it was true.
You think the scientists are wrong?
As I look at the history of the development of scientific thought, I find that scientists have been wrong more often than they've been right.
A number of people criticize science because it's contingent. There's no final answers, and it keeps revising some of its theories. Well, this presupposes that we can attain some kind of final answer or inerrant answer, which religionists claim revelation has provided. But it hasn't told us anything about anything that's credible.
People take for granted the fact that science is fact. Science is based on a belief system. That belief system is a very sophisticated belief system based on the fact that if something happens 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, 40 times, I can posit that it will happen the 41st time, and I can even assume that that's a fact. Now, that's not a fact. That's a belief system. I can't prove that it's going to happen a 41st time. It's a very reasonable belief system that I also buy into, and that's why when I have a headache, I take an aspirin.
You basically have to chuck science out the window if you want to believe in magic.
La scienza
dalle risposte ai grandi problemi che spiegano l'origine dell'universo. La fede dice che all'origine c'è Dio. It's possible for us to believe in evolution, but in Christian evolution, I say, it's not a war between religion and science. No, it's not war. Two different questions.
People are very good at compartmentalizing and thinking two different ways, aren't they? They're very good at having both the opinion and its opposite when it suits them, when it's convenient. You know, lots of people are for the, I know lots of people who are, for example, they think Israel should give back land to the Palestinians. None of them that I know of want to give their houses back to the American Indians. Now, how do you have both of these beliefs, that it's wrong to occupy somebody else's land and you should give it back, but maybe, well, the reason, of course, you hold both beliefs is it's very convenient to do so.
Because religion accepts authority and science absolutely should not. In that way, they're antithetic to each other.
I think science and religion can and have existed side by side for years. And I think certainly from a Druid perspective, the Druids were the ancient scientists. They plotted the universe and when the sun would rise and when it would set and where it would rise and where it would set.
Science is basically just the study of what you can observe.
Well, religion is, like you said, is based on faith. It's based on evidence of things not seen. Again, to go to the Bible, evidence of things not seen. Science is supposed to reflect objective reality. It's supposed to be finding out what actually is, not what wishes one exists, what hopes, one says exists without proof.
Religion is based on something that's intangible. It's based on a being that no one has seen.
那么，如果我们把这个 humanity 当做这个所有宗教的一个核心，那这个跟科学，我想它是可以结合在一起的，跟科学没有矛盾。
And science is the knowledge of creations, and Islam is the knowledge of creator.
You're doing God's work by being a scientist. Yeah, you're coexisting suddenly.
Well, of course. I mean, science is just learning to appreciate the works of God.
Science requires proof, and religion requires the lack of it.
We do not need the science, but it's a gift of God to explain the mysteries, to understand the mystery of the faith.
Where are religions the most dominant? In those countries that are have the most poverty, the most ignorance, the most repression, and it's in Europe that in places like Sweden and Scandinavian countries where people more or less have given up religious beliefs. So I think the future is certainly going to be one in which this will be looking back at religion the way we look back at early myths. We no longer believe Iliad and the Odyssey as being literally true.
Science is a natural growth of human understanding. So at a stage you consider God helps, God creates. At a stage you think God is submerged into the nature, and suddenly you discover the God and science don't clash with each other.
Well, I think there's some spheres, there's some questions that religion addresses that science can't answer. I mean, questions like, what's the meaning of life? Questions like, how should we treat our fellow man? What's ethical behavior?
Science and religion is one and the same, properly used.
The Bible is not about science. It's about how a people learned to make moral decisions and to set up a just society. And it's mostly full of bad examples, I have to say. It's very hard to find anyone in the Bible who really, succeeded. And mostly they fail.
No one's proven anything about the age of the world. There's no such thing as, it's a fact the world is. That's not a fact. That's based on a certain system of beliefs which, when applied to certain measurements, will come to the conclusion that such and such and such and such has existed for so long. That's very reasonable. That's very interesting. Now, what if Torah disagrees with that? Okay, well, my belief system says that man was created humankind was created 5,766 years and 20 days ago.
I have a nuclear physics background. I'm quite familiar with how you do geochronology. I do know the evidence that the Earth is 4.55 billion years old, plus give or take 70 million years. And it's very, very strong, right? You'd have to come up with quite a curveball to throw much of a wrench into that. I mean, maybe you could convince me that some wild underestimation of some systematic for some reason that it's really 4.3 billion years old, or even 5.1 billion years old. But 6,000? I mean, we see stars that are more than 6,000 light years away, and we know their distance by geometry. You know, that's not something we get wrong. You know, parallax, the first step on the cosmic distance ladder is just parallax. You know, you look how the thing moves back and forth as you go around the sun. That isn't wrong, okay? And it's geometry, right? We know there are stars farther than 6,000 light years away whose distance we know from friggin' geometry, okay? And so, you know, if the world was created 6,000 years ago, you know, so the light was created halfway in between. You know?
How long does it take geological formations to form? Millions of years. True. They were created full grown. They were created as if they had moved and shifted the way they do now, I assume, as if they had moved and shifted over a period of millions and millions and millions of years. But they were created at a particular time. As a matter of fact, they were created at the beginning of what you and I call time.
Well, we believe that God is the great scientist, and there's nothing evil or wrong about science.
The thing about physics and the sciences is we're not attached to our ideas. We understand that they're temporary. This is what I know now. This is the best understanding I've managed to gather about our world.
Understanding that this great unknown mystery is really unknowable, but there's a part of us that desires mapping. And so whatever maps work for you, use them. People with a scientific mindset are going to use that map. People with a faith-based orientation are going to use that map.
道教是世界上唯一不反对科学的现实的宗教。
Religious people are not that different from scientists, that they want their proof too, but they are more inclined to give it to those sacred documents than they are to the fallible human activity of scientists.
Well, we know that they do. We know that there is religion and we know that there is science. They both exist. So they do coexist.
I think what they can't do is intertwine because they're very, very different from one another.
Of course they can. They must coexist, but not all religions are willing to coexist with science.
You can't both believe that the way to know is to observe, to see, to measure, to verify, and yet also believe in something that can't be seen, observed, measured, or verified. Your allegiance, really, you got to go one way or the other. Either you have to say there are things in the universe that are absolutely beyond science, in which case you aren't a scientist, or you say there's nothing in the universe that's beyond science, in which case I don't see how you can be religious.
If you depend upon the Hebrew Bible for your science, then you're just a fool, it seems to me. That science has shown what the true parameters of the universe are. Of course, we have a long way to go, but we know enough now to realize that the Hebrews were just making an educated guess for their days.
I'm one of these people that tries to find some conciliatory balance between science and religion simply because it makes life easier for all of us, and the less conflict we have, the better. But logically speaking, whatever God is, he can't be part of the natural world. If he is, he's just an extraterrestrial intelligence of great power and so much smarter than us that we just call him a god, but it turns out he's just an ET. That can't be what people mean by God. So whatever God is has to be outside of space and time in the natural world, and therefore outside of anything science can possibly say about it.
Science makes progress. We actually learn things. And any kind of way of thinking that refuses to learn anything new, that insists on explaining the world as it was explained thousands of years ago, that cannot possibly be a good thing for the human race.
Science and religion can clash when you have a very strict interpretation of what the religion is all about.
There's not a single statement in the Quran which goes against established scientific fact.
Galileo says that science and religion, in fact, can never be in opposition. If science is the process by which humans give their most sincere, truthful witness of the existence in which we find themselves, and if God is truth, then how can these two things be in opposition?
I can argue with the religious person about science and will usually be able to agree or disagree along scientific terms. It's only when the religion impinges on the science that I would take umbrage.
There's a slight difference between science and bad things happen because God made them happen.
There are moral laws, and then there are physical laws. And so, yes, you violate the law of gravity, there are going to be consequences.
Science does not necessarily negate God from the equation. You know, could there be a creator that put all of this in place? Sure, but if he did, he made the earth, 4.5 billion years ago, and there was a big bang, and creatures evolved in this universe.
Between religion and science, the major difference is that science is trying to find a way to explore our understanding of existence that is verifiable. Religion is basically coming up with a set of values to direct your life, but it doesn't require any kind of proof.
Religion has science envy. For some reason, it wants to be like science.
Because every time science discovers something, religion tells you that we knew it. So that is how they coexist.
Religion seeks to validate itself and prove that it was right all along, while science really triumphs in being shown that it was wrong.
Science is always questioning its beliefs, its laws, its theories. Religion asks you, on faith, to accept them without questioning. That's why I personally feel they can only coexist in parallel tracks.
I guess two ideas can conflict, but I think that they can definitely live side by side until science gets so advanced that it disproves religion.
The Catholic Church made Galileo, based on his astronomical observations, recant his support of the heliocentric view, because this was supposed to be the domain of a Catholic Church. So he had to kneel before the Inquisition and renounce those particular views. Bruno was burned at the stake because he supported the view of an infinite universe. And we know, many other persecutions throughout history by the church who maintained that it was the sole source of truth.
Why use a 2,000-year-old religion to tell you what's going on in present day? Written by a bunch of cranky old men,
Religion is asking the same questions today that were asked 1,000 years ago, and as near as I can tell, has gotten no closer to a consensus over that 1,000 years. There's no evidence that it's a process that leads in any progressive way to a greater understanding of the truth, whereas science does seem to have that property.
Good science is observable, repeatable, and testable.
What you want to ask the Bible to do is to tell you what life is for. What makes life interesting? And the Bible is trying to tell you that not that we fell, but that through an early act of childish disobedience, we gained the ability to make decisions between right and wrong, to differentiate between right and wrong. That's a very important thing, that we can make these moral decisions. And then the Bible says to us, you must make them. And in order to live in the way that this God wants you to live in, you must choose the good and eschew evil. That's your job.
Galileo also left with Einstein the idea that if the Creator endowed us with this ability to generate reason, then how could it be wrong for us to exercise this?
Right now in the Muslim world, you can't question these principles that are held up as truths because you'll get killed. At least, we have to remember that 500 years ago you couldn't do that in the West or you get killed. I mean, we had religious wars that went on for 200 years over this very fact. I mean, Huguenots and Catholics killed each other in France, and Puritans killed Anglicans, and Presbyterians killed you know, I mean, it was amazing what went on.
If you're a good scientist, right, you have to be rigorously skeptical and very highly questioning of your scientific beliefs. And yet, to be religious, you have to not question certain things. So, to me, this is a bifurcation of your belief system that I just can't do myself.
Religion and science can coexist, but if it is a pure science. The pure science is science of self-realization.
When religion pretends to explain the world, it usually gets it wrong. In the same way that when science attempts to give us the meaning of things, it usually gets it wrong.
Religion is based on faith, which is not susceptible to testing. It's independent of prediction. And science is just all about prediction, and so the two are just fundamentally different. If I said, for example, the universe was created 5 minutes ago by magic invisible genies, complete with our memories intact, and so we think it's much older, and they go around making everything happen, that would explain everything. But that's not what it's about. It makes no unambiguous predictions, and therefore it's not science. And so in a similar way, I mean, you could say that we are here on Earth because God put us here 6,000 years ago and just made it look like it was much older, and that everything is here for the purpose which He intends, which we may not know about. And that's fine. That could be used to explain things, but it does not make any unambiguous predictions because God can do anything, and so it isn't science.
Whether the world was created in 4000 BC should be virtually unimportant. The really big issue for Christians is, can human beings be resurrected? Do they walk upon the earth after they've died?
I can say scientists have faith, but science have no faith.
The science that we know to be true is the science we know to be false.
The nice thing about sort of science is it's like a ratchet. You only ever move forward.
There is no backtracking in the progress of science. Once people open their eyes to the power of opening their eyes, once people open their eyes to the power of seeing for themselves, they never go back.
God basically explains the unknown. But once there is no more unknown, we don't really need God.
Were we created or did we evolve?
I've heard the claims, actually. At one time, I believed in evolution, and I looked for evidence for it, but I did not see it.
What about the fossil record?
We don't have actual full fossils like that show that transition. And then how do we know some of these creatures that we see bones like, they just did not have arthritis or something?
God created, first He created birds and fish, and then created mammals. There is something mentioned in the verse when it says what He created first. It says birds and mammals, and the words in Hebrew are taninim gdolim, which literally translates as great lizards. If you translate it into Latin, that's dinosauros. And they're never mentioned again.
Where's the description in the Bible for dinosaurs?
All right, he says here, "Behold now Behemoth, which I have made, he eats grass like the ox. He moveth his tail like a cedar. His bones are like bars of iron."
You could use that description for a rhinoceros or an elephant.
Well, excuse me, but what you don't understand is that dinosaurs did not live before man. So you're not getting all the facts at the university.
What?
The way the university approaches this topic is just to make it propaganda and indoctrination.
Both creationism and evolution kind of stem from the same thing, which is something coming out of nothing, and a lot of it's based on faith rather than science and rational thinking.
Intelligent life comes of age when it first works out the reason for its own existence. And the date when that happened was 1859.
What happened in 1859?
Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species.
Already, when Charles Darwin first came out with that idea, people were like, that's not possible. I believe in God. God created us, blah, 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 blah. Well, look at now. Now so many people believe in religion. They teach it in schools. Court cases are being fought over it. So eventually there's going to be, bye-bye, God created the world. Hello, evolution.
Is the evolutionary record there? Absolutely. I mean, anybody who's looked at the science on DNA and the science that we get through paleontology and anthropology, it's obvious. I mean, that there is an evolutionary process. What people don't understand is that evolution was known and talked about by that name before Darwin. Darwin, what he contributed was not the idea that we evolved as opposed to ex nihilo creation. There were already Christians who absolutely thought it was obvious that the fossil record made it clear that we evolved. What he did was propose a mechanism that did not require God's intervention.
Evolution works. God took something that existed and changed it.
We need better science, not better religion, better science on that. And because it has become a religion to uphold Darwin's theory as an unassailable final word of the prophet, we're not actually learning the mechanisms by which evolution takes place, and we need to. And I just can't believe we came from a pollywog. That's
You don't get me going on that.
that's beyond me. You know.
No. They're
I
still
just
here.
can't
We're
believe
still
it.
not coming from
We're
them,
still not
so.
coming from. Yeah, I mean that whole
Same with apes.
Big Bang theory is.
There's no doubt that if you care anything about evidence, human beings evolved. The only way to not believe that is to absolutely shut your eyes to all of the evidence. I think anybody who believes that human beings didn't evolve should be disqualified from a jury. I don't want somebody judging the particulars of a crime who doesn't believe that evidence matters. I mean, would you want to go to court? They haul you in and say, you know, we think you were the perpetrator of a hit and run, and the people on the jury are people who say, oh, I don't care what anybody says, I don't care what the films say, I don't care what the tire evidence suggests. No, I don't believe in that. I just have faith this guy is guilty. We would find that preposterous. We wouldn't allow those people to serve on a jury. Why in the world then is it a prerequisite for becoming the President of the United States when it would disqualify you from jury service?
The theory of evolution isn't just based on finding a bunch of fossils. There's a whole chain of spectacular research in molecular genetics that connect us to every other living organism on Earth at the molecular and genetic level.
Adam and Eve were created on the 6th day of creation. How old were they? They were 30 years old, meaning if CNN were recording that event, if Roger Nygard were recording that event for a documentary, he would logically presume that these people have been here for 30 years. That would be a reasonable assumption based on everything else he sees. But he just saw, obviously you couldn't, but he just saw they were created a second ago. In other words, there's a time warp in creation.
The body that we are in evolved, I believe, under the direction or with the knowledge of God that it would evolve, whether he actually intervened at some genetic level or simply waited until evolution produced what he knows that on every world it eventually produces.
It appears that evolution has been the persistent evolution of creatures that have gained a greater and greater appreciation of dimensions. So, for example, plants, which don't have a nervous system, are like the point in geometry. I mean, they don't know, they're not aware of their existence in space or time. And then you get those little one-celled critters, and they move towards nutrients and they move away from noxious stimuli. And as far as they're concerned, they're like the line. They exist on a clothesline. And then you get the planaria, the little flatworm, and it has the first creature has a bifurcated nervous system, a right and a left side. And they probably understand that they move not only back and forth, but they move from side to side. And then once you get to vertebrates, from fish forward, every vertebrate has a bilobe brain, a right brain and a left brain. And from that moment on, they all have a cerebellum. And once you have a cerebellum, which is a part of the brain, every vertebrae knows that it moves in 3 dimensions of space. They all know that. What they don't know is that they exist in time. I mean, you can't ask a frog what he had for lunch yesterday. It doesn't remember, you know? Well, lions are not thinking about what they're going to do next Thursday. I mean, they exist pretty much in the now. So here's this other incredible dimension called time that, for all practical purposes, the vast majority of creatures and animals do not even know exists.
The preponderance of scientific evidence tells us that we evolved, but we didn't evolve from monkeys, as is often stated. There were pre-existing life forms as far as we can tell, and increasingly we find the evidence for creatures that were before us. They were neither apes nor were they human, but they were part of our story. They were, in a very real sense, our relatives. So scientifically, evolution doesn't have a challenge. Perhaps society as a whole has a challenge accepting evolution.
I don't see any contradiction between that and a creative God, a creating God. That God is present in all of creation, in all of matter, in all of life, in all of that exists, and that he is working towards a more perfect state.
It's only a conflict if you believe in a creation which is absolutely, 7 days and it happened just like this. It's perfectly reasonable, it seems to me, to believe in a God who allows creation to evolve and directs that evolution.
Some of the creationist thinking is that it's really quite aggressive in a desire to police truth, to pose the creationist view over against what people call the evolutionary view, as if somehow the creationist view is more correct in Christian terms. I think what we're saying is that we don't believe that those two languages are in conflict.
Man was created.
Humans were created during evolution.
God created us, and if there's been any form of evolution, it's because God simply started us here and has moved us towards what He wanted us later.
I think religion has to be very careful about making strong pronouncements that are contrary to observed fact. The same sort of thing happened when it was shown that the Earth went round the sun, that we weren't at the center of the universe, and from all that we can tell, the universe exists, but its purpose is not totally locked up with our own personal purpose.
And it's been proven every time the evolutionist comes up with something, the creation side disprove it every time.
Humans have always thought ourselves very, very special. And it's turned out over the last 50 years that one by one, the things that we thought were so special were not so special. And that other animals exhibit those traits.
I don't think someone goes to hell for believing in evolution. Someone could just be naive, or that's what they're taught all their life, or they think it looks credible. You see all these charts and whatever, and it looks good. But to me, the real problem is that people become convinced that they are mere animals. Then they start living and acting like animals.
And as soon as an individual changes his mind and decides to be governed by intelligence, by reason, by truth, by the Spirit of God, he'll get a revelation. I'm not an animal. I'm a unique creation made in the image of God. No wonder the unbeliever believes in evolution, because he's living like an animal.
There are plenty of people who say, nobody's ever going to persuade me that I'm descended from a monkey. They just don't like the idea. There are people who just have a kind of visceral reaction. There are people who feel that it has moral implications. If you teach children they're nothing but monkeys, they'll behave like nothing but monkeys. Or if you teach them they're nothing but slime, primeval slime, that's what you're going to get. These are emotional, irrational, unthought out, know-nothing responses.
We Satanists embrace us as being an animal. We think we are no different than all the other animals that exist on this globe and other ones that we might find extraterrestrially if that should ever happen. We're proud of that. There's nothing wrong with being an animal.
वो पहले बहुत जन्मों से चला आता है. कभी कुत्ता, बिल्ली, भेड़, बकरी बनता और कर्म करता हुआ यहाँ आता है. मनुष्य का काम है शुभ कर्म करके ऊपर जाना, heaven में जाना.
Man was created, but after creation, his knowledge keeps on developing.
阴阳一结合就出来人，他主要是信奉这个，我感觉到。
We don't believe in creator, and everything exists by the karma, and I am here because of my own karma. I'm not created by anybody.
I don't believe in evolution, that we just evolved from something. I mean, if you just look outside, how could something like that just happen? It had to have a creator.
What are you? To know whether you were created or you evolved, you have to know what you are. If you think you're your body, then you could believe that you evolved out of an ape. If you think that you're a spirit, then you can think that you evolved out of God.
We could say that our bodies came from this earth. But from whence do our minds arise?
仏教を勉強する者としてその答えにはどちらとも言えません。人は存在するものですから、どうしてかということは問いません。
Everybody has an emotional attachment to evolution because we've been surrounded with it so long. And I'm going to give you some evidence that's contrary to evolution. it's going to meet a resistance. Just be ready for that.
Because we are expected to question our faith in order to realize that it's true, we have to be provided with at least logical arguments against it, or what seems to be logical. And if God wants to plant bones around that are old, that our chemical tests prove to be older than what we believe the world is, it's a test for us that God has given us.
Science is testable. You have to be able to test a theory.
Well, you can't test evolution either.
Yes, you can.
The evolutionists admit it happens over millions, if not billions of years, that no one has observed one species turning into another species. We all intuitively know we're not animals. The reason a lot of you think you're animals is because you act like animals. Your brains have dropped down into your genitals. So let's lift up the brains out of the genital area, back up here in our cranium. That's what separates us from the ape.
One of the objections people often have of evolution is actually a misunderstanding. They say, I didn't come from a monkey. What are you saying? They're trying to use evolution as a way of explaining individual changes.
We can't fathom what a billion years is, because our lives are only a fraction of that.
People may simply not understand the vast amount of time that the evolution requires.
Simple forms of life may originate very, very quickly. Now, for a period of about 2 billion years, life remained essentially microbial. And so it may very well be that only under very special circumstances, very favorable planets with very favorable histories of the right kind of species extinctions and so forth, only under those circumstances does one get an evolution to larger creatures.
I find it much more plausible to believe that the things which happened, which were so improbable, happened partly because there was someone behind it. Can I prove that? No. Can I ever prove that? I don't think I can. But neither can the scientists prove that it didn't happen that way either.
Evolution is well established, so the principle of natural selection and all this, and does make predictions and has made predictions that were not known at the time, including the existence of and the properties of DNA, the existence of transitional forms in the fossil record. Some of, only a little bit was known in Darwin's time, but many more have been found since. The age of the Earth and other things, which again, there was contention back in Darwin's day about this, but now we know this from radioactive dating and all sorts of other things. So it's made predictions which sort of pan out, and this is sort of the key.
If we just evolved, why aren't we still evolving?
We are not in, as they say, God's image. In other words, we are set, this is it, we've always been this, and we'll remain this way. No, evolution is a very slow process. It's not 1 year, it's not 10 years, it's not a lifetime, it's not 10 lifetimes.
Evolution is counterintuitive. It takes a long time for things to change. We operate on a human time scale of months, years, decades at most. Evolution typically happens over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of years. You can't see it. It's very difficult to infer it. So evolution is a historical science. It's an inferential science.
I'm looking at you, and I'm sorry. You didn't. It takes just too much faith to believe that you came out of a swamp.
Intuitively, almost everybody thinks, no, I just think God made it. It's just simpler, easier to grasp, I think. It's two things, deep time and deep space, that are counterintuitive. The universe is being 13.7 billion years old. What does that even mean? And that's its size also. You look back out in space, you're looking back in time. What? I mean, it's weird. And the fact that we could have come from slime mold, how could this possibly happen? So it takes a really sophisticated inferential science to put all that together. But there it is. We've done it. I mean, it's no more impressive than what computer people are able to do these days with cell phones. I mean, that's also completely counterintuitive. But we're used to some of these things, and so we accept them.
Life has three properties everywhere. It almost defines life. Life exists, therefore it survives. It propagates in order to survive, and it evolves because that also aids survival, but it's unavoidable. Everything evolves. The universe evolves. Stars evolve. People evolve. Everything that is alive evolves. And it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. What's happening with time with us is that we're getting more and more complex. We're managing larger and larger amounts of information. We're creating devices that can store and manipulate information at fantastic speeds. We're also learning, perhaps unfortunately, perhaps prematurely, but we're learning how to manipulate the nature of life and evolution itself. Evolution to this point has been natural selection, but now a new element is coming in. Without great restraint, in the not distant future, we will be able to create life forms.
The idea of arranging a marriage is to produce a better next generation. Humans have been doing that ever since they started to notice.
We may be the path towards some ultimate intelligence, some ultimate life in the universe that would be virtually indistinguishable from what we call God.
Oh, no, I think intelligent design is a piece of political fraud. And it is a way of sneaking religion into schools. But I think creationism is a view that I will respect as long as it doesn't make itself out to be creation science.
Intelligent design is not a scientific theory of the world that has any experimental evidence or anything else to back it up. There's simply this claim that, oh, life must be too complicated to have formed from natural sort of processes. For anyone to say that is patently ridiculous, because nobody understands the complex dynamics of all these processes well enough to make any conclusive statements about it.
You don't believe God designed us, designed our eyes to be the way they are, designed our appendix,
no,
designed
all the things, our narrow pelvis so that so many women died in childbirth. Yes, God liked the other gorillas to die less in childbirth than human beings. God had some special thing for human beings.
But there is some evidence of intelligent design, I think, like the human eye. That can't happen by accident, I don't think. And also the fact that the penis is at arm's length. I mean, that's not just by random chance. I mean.
Mehera Baba says that the human form is the perfect form and it is the final evolutionary form.
The amazing eyes that we have appear to have evolved independently in a very similar way several different times. For example, octopus eyes are remarkably similar, both in structure and function, to our eyes. And apparently that was a completely separate evolution. On the other hand, the high intelligence that modern humans have, combined with high manual dexterity, arose nowhere else. We're the only species. And that suggests that that may be a step that's even harder. And because we only have this one example, we really have no idea how common this sort of thing is.
When we look at the process of evolution, we want to understand why it happened the way it did, why it's guided in the way that it is towards improvement, towards the illusion of design, which it most certainly is. What evolution is about, what natural selection is about, is the differential survival of replicating codes, pieces of code in the same sense as computer code, which accurately reproduce themselves, that's why they're called replicators, from generation to generation. Very, very accurately, but not totally accurately. That's the phenomenon of mutation, occasional errors. As a consequence of the competition between these replicators, or more directly between the bodies in which they sit, what I've called the vehicles, the individual animals and plants, as a consequence of this competition between over-reproducing individuals, those replicators, those genes, which are best at building individuals, best at making individuals, are the ones that survive in the world. And they're the ones that are good at it. Over generations, they get better at it. The illusion of design grows and grows gradually. And in its different ways, in all the different species of animals and plants that have ever lived, all have their different ways of surviving. Whatever it is, it's a good way of surviving, And it's a good way of surviving. It has to be a good way of surviving, or they wouldn't have survived. That's why birds are good at flying. That's why fish are good at swimming. That's why humans are good at thinking.
We exist immediately as created beings, but at the same time, we can have an experience in the material world that may require a process that we call evolution.
You know, what kind of selection process would put a delusion in our head? Well, it would the kind of selection process that would just want to make a stronger animal. And us believing in something that doesn't exist for its palliative and coping effects has apparently fortified our species and made us a stronger animal.
Man was created and then evolved.
We're evolved to try to make relatively simple judgments, right? And remember, the judgments that we're evolved to make don't have to be right every time. They just have to be right more often than the judgments that the guy before you made. There's a famous story about an evolutionist who was with another evolutionist, and they confronted a bear. And they turned, and the evolutionist started running away. And the other guy said, "Why are you bothering to run away? You can't outrun a bear." And the first evolutionist said, "I don't have to outrun the bear. I only have to outrun you."